Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, thank you to FinnCham China and the EU China IP SME Helpdesk for hosting today's webinar, and thank you all for joining. I believe many of you are running real projects and may know about the regulations about the EU and China. So considering the session's complexity and informative adequacy, I will keep this practical and high level. So very briefly, who I am, I'm Lei Shi, an expert of the EU SME Helpdesk. I work in cross-border IP and governance, especially where AI projects touch trade secrets, data boundaries, and governance. I also led SLS related work in this space. SLS Global is a global governance platform led by local vetted professionals. Cross-border work often fails when quality coordination and proof break down. So we translate and architect the parts that most often go off the rails into operating mechanisms a company can run, sustain, and defend with proof. SLS Consulting is our delivery arm in Greater China. We are lawyer-led, and we work at the level of strategic governance, like market entry risk proofing, trade secrets, data controls, platform, and also supply chain rules and resilience, as well as disputes. And we are anchored in Hong Kong as a structuring hub. So let me define briefly that what you will get today. Okay, this session is designed for those AI projects meetings, like where everyone is moving fast, but the most basic question remain unclear. Like, what can we put? Okay, who owns what? Okay, and what happens when something goes wrong? So my goal is to give you one shared internal language. Try my best. Okay, like for example, 30-day plan after this seminar and a minimum playbook. The executives, engineers, legal, procurement, and IT security are all talking about the slides. Stories. So we would like to make sure that we can actually use together and stay together. Okay. And to be clear, this is not a session about reciting article numbers or any details or comparing the laws or regulations between European and also China side by side. In practice, companies usually get into trouble through ordinary daily habits, like vendors use whatever system is convenient. It looks like efficiency, right? But it is often where the boundary starts to break. So here's the agenda. We will go from what's happening in the market to see how risks really happens in daily workflows, and then to the minimum controls that keep your asset boundary intact, okay, across IP, trade secrets, data boundary, vendor management, and evidence backup, okay? So you can prove what you did when pressure hits. So we will hold on 4 questions for you to take along this session. What can never be fed into any model, no matter how agent? This is the first one, okay? And what must be ring-fenced and isolated, like systems, whether it's systems or people or vendors or environments, okay? And third, in collaboration, who owns improvements, and what can each party keep using? So ownership doesn't drift, okay? The fourth is, and if something happens tomorrow, can you export an evidence pack within 24 hours to show that what controls you actually run? So everything today hangs on those 4 questions. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. This is a very general session. We would like to give you all the information or try our best to give you the methodology or solution, but it's not legal advice. I won't give case-specific conclusions in public. So, and I won't provide clause-by-clause contract templates or legal advice. So what I will give you is a clean framework and practical levers that you can take back and use immediately. Okay, so let's go through the first module. What is market reality? Okay, so let's see AI competitives has moved away from a single technical edge, right? What matters now is a combined system, algorithms, data, models, real use cases, and how the organization actually runs them. Okay, the shift changes what IP advantage even means. Shift from IP advantage to what we will talk about later. Okay, so we can see in 2024, China's AI industry surpassed RMB 900 billion in 2024, and also growing around 24% year on year. But the number is not the real point. So what's the real point for us? The real point is a shift in what competitive advantage even starts. Okay, it used to be a single point technical superiority. Now it's organic integration of algorithms, data, and models, and importantly, how an organization runs that integration day to day. So that's why IP and trade secrets have moved from a legal topic to a governance topic. So this is also why trade secrets have become essential and central in AI. A lot of what matters most in generative AI, like the weights, like the training data, parameters, configurations, often does not fit cleanly into classic patent or copyright rules, at least not in a way that matches AI's speed and iteration. Okay, so some teams run into patentability questions, and others like hit copyright friction around human authorship, expression, and what counts as protectable subject matter. So it's several methods. So we also keep seeing the wider doctrine understream, algorithm patentability, AI assistant copyright, AI inventor debate, and commercial value of training data. Okay, so trade secret protection ends up filling the gap. So it doesn't require a ground procedure, and it matches how actually AI works. And that's why I sometimes call trade secret as a natural shield for AI. There are three reasons. First, there is no ground procedure. Okay, protection arises as soon as qualifying conditions are met, which fits very fast at generation. Okay. Second, it can sidestep some IP constraints that slow teams down, like those recurring database around human authorship, expression, or technical problem framing. The third reason is it covers the black box naturally. Okay, it has like covers weights, algorithm, and related know-how along much more comfortably with confidentiality requirements than traditional software copyright thinking. Okay, so now here's a warning signal that makes everyone or makes this real for executive to worry about. The Samsung incident. I will tell it very briefly, right? Employees inadvertently disclosed the confidential data while using the ChatGPT for work tasks. It is not a bad people, right? So it was about ordinary workflows, like very simple translation, the summarization, debugging, paraphrase, drafting, and etc. So that's the uncomfortable truth. So AI doesn't have to hack you, okay? It can pull the value out through normal work habits if boundaries are not set. So what are the key tensions that make AI trade secret governance generally hard? Like first, the black box problem makes infringement comparison extremely difficult. A trained model is not like source code, where you can line up files and diff them. A lot sits in the high-dimensional parameters, weights, intermediate outcomes. That means fact-finding becomes harder and enforcement becomes relatively slower, right? The second, the open source frameworks blur the boundary between the public and proprietary. Companies optimize on top of open source code. That's normal, but it also makes it harder to isolate what is truly proprietary, and it creates room for confusion if your team do not manage the province licensing and also internal boundaries carefully. Okay. The third one is there's a multi-law overlap that most people underestimate. One data set can trigger trade secrets like personal data security, national security, and sector rules at the same time. Let's take an example. Autonomous driving is the easiest one. Okay, road test data can always touch sensitive one, can always touch technical parameters, mapping-related geospatial compliance, and personal information protections all at once. Okay, so there is no unified single lens framework. Protection plans require cross-regime legal scoping and technical handling together. The fourth, civil litigation is often slow and AI accelerates fast. That creates a brutal mismatch. By the time a case concludes, the technology may have already evolved. Okay, sometimes to the point where we saw the original asset has lost value. On top of that, AI cases tend to be evidence heavy and technically concealed. Evidence is largely electronic. We all believe that, right? So damage spreads also quickly. The old rhythm of finding the rule, finding the issue, give us an IRAC, write a letter, file a case, and wait. So this common or routine is often too slow to stop the harm in time. So if we zoom in further into the judicial or regulatory realities, you can feel why companies struggle. Okay, first, evidence is difficult. We discussed model parameters aren't reviewed conventionally. Some form of model dissection or specialized analysis is often required. Litigation cycles are long. Proof burdens stay heavy. Plaintiffs must establish secrecy, infringement, and causation. Okay, damages are hard to quantify because AI licensing benchmarks remain immature. So true innovation value is difficult to reflect. And also sometimes injunctions, interim relief can also be hard. Like courts are cautious, and verifying algorithm deletion in cloud deployment is technically complex. And if you look at criminal linkage, thresholds are high. In China, people often cite a RMB 300,000 loss figure as a reference point, but in AI context, loss evidence can be hard to produce quickly. So that is exactly why the next step matters, because you can't lawyer your way out after the fact. So you need the control language and minimum operating system before the incident happens. Okay. So, so we will see the module 2 to discuss about how we operate in this kind of environment. So companies often come to us to talk about IP advantage. So in the AI era, I usually reset the frame. Okay, advantage is no longer a single technical edge. It's a combination. We discuss about algorithm, combine data, models, real use cases, and how the organization actually runs them. So people think they are debating technology. What they're really touching is the most valuable class of assets. That are the ones that are hardest to replace and hardest to win back once they leak. So why do the same issues keep coming back? It's not because people don't care. So it's because the organization doesn't share one language. Executives, BD teams, engineers, legal, finance, procurement, IT security, everybody sees a slice and everybody feels they only take a small step. It doesn't matter. Like paste a snippet to debug, drop in customer requirements to summarize, pick a faster vendor, add an NDA, add a permission. So each step looks harmless. Altogether, the quiet thing the boundary. So there's another ground rule. The better the model works, the more you need a clear do not touch line from day one. So if you wait, until the project is running and try to patch it later, costs will go up and friction explodes. So you will be seen as a blocker, not a governance. Okay, so linkage also have changed the shape. We used to think, okay, we need to picture USB drives, forwarded emails, someone living with files. We need to take care of that. So those risks still exist. I need to admit, but AI makes leakage routine and process based and easy to rationalize, like translating, polishing, summarizing, drafting, writing cases, paraphrasing. Everything looks like normal work. So if you don't set boundaries early, inputs keep happening under the banner of efficiency, and risk accumulates while the organization barely notices. Okay, so one common mistake is training AI as an external regulatory issue. So teams will call all lawyers, or teams move only after the policies, customer questions, or disputes. But most losses in AI projects flow outward from inside the organization. So today's most expensive assets often are not certificates or published code. They're processes, they're process assets you run every day. How you tune models, clean data, deploy, write prompts, orchestrate agents, connect workflows, and all the process you need to take care, and all these require human review. Okay, without boundaries, you are building and leaking it at the same time. So that is why I call this asset control. So not just compliance. That is not this trade secret logic is quite simple for us. So you can't just say this is important. You must define what it is, why it has value, and what secrecy measures you actually run. Law pushes you back to management. Do you have an inventory, classification, permission, logs, training agreements, offboarding cleanup, vendor limits, and etc. So trade secrets also become the backbone that connects IP, data governance, vendor management, and dispute response into one governable dossier. So in generative AI, the tension is relatively sharper from my side. Okay, like data, algorithm, weights, configuration matter hugely, but they often sit in gray zones for traditional copyright roles. Many companies naturally place them under trade secrets. That's fine, that's okay, but only if secrecy measures are real, not just words on paper. So what we do from here, don't manage AI, don't manage it. AI is dangerous as a vague fear. Manage what, but manage which assets AI amplifies in value, and which leakage pathways AI amplifies at the same time. So once you shift from should we adopt AI to how do we bring AI under asset control, the next step will get simpler for you. Okay, so you stop asking which law is scariest and start asking where is our input boundary and what must be ring-fenced, and how do we allocate improvements, and can we prove our controls with an evidence trial. So AI hasn't replaced trade secret protection. It makes it more central than ever. So you don't treat this as a legal project. Treat it as a cross-department asset control project. It's a strategic level. So this is also how risk moves from out of control to your board's manageable. So let's go straight to the risk map, which are general ones, and into 5 categories. So category 1 is deployment and system architecture exposure. Secrets live in your deployment logic, like model selection, compute scaling, KB integration, which is knowledge-based, system integration, and roadmap. So if a competitor gets this, they can shortcut years without copying your code. So what is a common leakage? Where is it? Like, for example, vendors or outsourcers overacting in your ops, or architecture documents forward without controls or watermarks, and oversharing in talks or technical write-ups. Okay. The second category is agent orchestration logic. So prompt engineering and knowledge base linkage. So in enterprise use, the edge is often how you run the model, not the base model itself. Like, for example, task decomposition to writing, context structure, guardrails, and accumulated knowledge. Once workflows, decision rules, or knowledge-based content leak, you have already exposed the business operating system. So what are the typical roles? Like third-party platforms hosting configurations, weak controls on debugging interfaces, like screenshots or exports, and sloppy sync that exposes internal repositories. Okay. The third category is like data internalization leakage during your training, fine-tuning, and evaluation. So if sensitive business data or real transaction records enter your training or evaluation without strong identification, they can persist in weights, caches, eval sets, or logs, and later be extracted via distillation. Okay. And also reverse engineering, prompt attack, or governance failure. So your core questions are: must it enter? Who can access? How long is kept? And how deletion works? And whether deletion can be proven. Okay, there are several typical failures we face in the past, like fine-tuning undisclosed financial data, transactional data, uploading trade secret records for third-party evaluation, and test environments where data lingers and gets reused. Okay. And then category 4 is employee misuse of public models. So this is rarely malice. Okay, it's not bad. They're not bad people from our source. It's convenience. So code snippets, contract drafts, or customer requirements and pricing logic maybe get pasted just to make things speed it up, okay? And then the boundary disappears. So without a clear no-go list, 2 controls, and short practical training, this will become routine leakage. So category 5 is soft boundary risk from vendors, like third parties, multi-tenant environments, and jailbreak, prompt injection attacks. In hosted setups, like API setups, cloud model agent vendors, integrators may touch knowledge bases, logs, parameters, and call patterns during building and also debugs. So teams will think we didn't give them more code, but they have often exposed enough context and data flow to create the risk. Okay. Let's go with the some part of the industries to try to make it more vivid. Okay, so in terms of autonomous driving, core secrets include perception data, decision parameters, simulation data, safety, redundancy designs, and road test data handling. So this area crosses multiple regimes. For example, we discussed trade secrets, personal information protection, data security, and even national security, mapping, surveying. So road test data can contain both regulated geospatial elements and highly confidential model strategies. So you need protection measures that still allow required disclosure in testing or incident scenarios, like balancing your openness and secrecy. Okay. And also we have financial institutions internal models for financial institutions. Internal models support your customer analysis, risk control, AML, internal Q&A, and research. So privacy, transaction patterns, scorecard logic, rule engine parameters, and monitoring strategies are rarely sensitive. So if employees fed it into external models or vendors access interfaces without constraints, it's core rules leaking. It's not a technical experiment. So also we can talk about biotech. The trap is thinking the algorithm is the main asset. Often the real risk is data identity, okay? Like genetic, materials or geomic or sample-related materials and information that may fall into human genetic resources compliance. These are the real boundaries by law. And also these might be with approval or filing beforehand and cross-border constraints, okay? Start from 4 questions if you are in the biotech industry. Right? What can't be input? What must be reinforced? Like features data or regulated or raw data or re-identifiable data, and how ownership is allocated across CRO, compute, AI partners, and what evidence pack proves provenance, ethics, consent, approval, filings, access, and secrecy matters. So the value is proof of your governance. Okay, so risk is a map, not a single line, and the 5 categories often appear together. Don't focus only one or focus just on is there any infringement. Focus on whether boundaries are thinning or whether boundaries are really set up. Okay, so now we come to quiet bleeding. How risks really happens. So it's not for drama, but to really to name a pattern. So many losses don't explode. So they leak out slowly during and through our daily workflows. So if you only watch for infringement or fines or penalties, you miss the main pathways. Let's have a practical test. So if employees can use public models freely, but the company can't clearly answer what can be input, what must be de-identified, and what must be locked. So it's likely already bleeding. Okay? A trade secret law doesn't care about the intent. It cares whether your boundary has been rubbed thin until you can't explain what went out, how much, and where. Okay? So AI makes this harder because the linkage looks like normal work. So we can say like translating, polishing, summarizing, and etc. we discussed. So, and the generative AI is an naturally input, reasoning, output process. So what you feed in becomes context. So you think you're borrowing a tool. In risk terms, you are putting company information into a system that may retain log or reduce it in ways you can't easily prove or explain later. Okay, so quiet bleeding isn't one theft; it's workflow-driven spillover. So this context connects directly to the broader risk map, like architecture exposure, workflow, data internalization during your training or evaluation. So together, they create a state where the boundary is no longer something you draw; it's something you use up. Okay. So treat quiet bleedings as a managerial or management signal, not a legal term. It's not solved by one policy. It's organization level governance. So bring it under your asset control language. For example, you can set up your input boundaries, fix two boundaries, isolate key assets, and lock down your vendor use and ownership and etc. So quiet bleeding happens in daily and ordinary workflows. But don't worry. So you just do not start with a long policy memo. Start with your 3 actions. Tell your employees that what must never be pasted in. Hard code allow tools and use cases, and ensure your key projects can export a minimum evidence pack. We will discuss. I will give you the methodology. And once those run, not perfect, okay, invisible leakage can be managed, but not perfect, right? So this comes to the real methodology that we are going to talk. So what assets are you actually protecting? So when people say asset protection, so they still default to source code or patents or contracts. So in generative AI work, the hardest thing to fit neatly into traditional copyright are often exactly the prompt rules, okay? Like trainings, database, model weights, path selections, parameter configurations, algorithm choices, and processed intermediate outputs. Add to that the operating layer, the agent like orchestration workflows and prompt libraries, private knowledge bases. And your asset map is clearly bigger than the code and documents. So I recommend a simple 4-layer inventory for you to refer to create your company's own. Okay, so layer 1, we can see here for like say core technical information like model architecture, weights, parameters like trainings and inference strategies, multimodal fusion paths, quantization or Browning plans, interfaces, plugin, and safety guardrails. So what is the key point here for layer 1? So it is not everything that should follow one IP role or one IP portfolio. Some elements that are better kept as trade secrets because patent or copyright eligibility can be uncertain for some time, okay? So layer 2, it's concluded as data assets, okay? Like raw data, cleaned training sets, labeled training set, stage weights, test and experiment outputs, and operation logs. Public raw data often is not secret, but processed data sets, weights, intermediate outputs, logs, and failed experiments often carry the real commercial edge because the know-how is the trail and error trial, okay? So layer 3 is method and process assets. So this is what most company undercount. So a prompt library compresses business understanding and quality control. A workflow encodes task decomposition. What the model does, what must be human verified. Agent design is how a business embeds rules, thresholds, and capability into a system. As enterprise use deepens, it becomes variable, right? So it's like model plus agent plus workflow plus knowledge base. It is a trade secret carrier in its own right. So layer 4 is business and strategic intelligence. So we can call it BI in short. So AI operations generate sensitive business signals, deployment plans, roadmaps, cost structures, and vendor terms, compute and token economics, and organizational priorities. So which model you use is rarely the worst league. Why you choose it, okay? Where you invest and what you build next is what matters in this area. So we will discuss a real case later here. So this is also a fallback and also a case that we need to talk about because in our session, we do not have too much time to talk about cases, but this is a real one that we need to think about. So that's a fallback and also a warning point that when trade secret or copyright does not fit cleanly, okay? It's data-related competitive interests. So in the case often discussed in China as the first data IP registration certificate dispute. It happened in Beijing in 2024. Commentary describes a path where substantial investment plus competitive value can support an anti-unfair competition competitive interest claim. So even if a data set is public and also not treated as a copyright work. Okay, this is very beyond the current trade secret or IP area that we all know. The practical point is understandable and also very logical. So even when secret fails, substantial investment plus commercial advantage plus evidence pack can still give you a protection angle. So from our basic past mindset, there is a common stereotype, which is once data is public in China, protection is basically gone. So this because we all think about the intellectual property law or trade secret. So this case sends a different signal. So the appellate court said a public data set may fail the trade secret and copyright rules, yet, however, protection can still arise under the anti-unfair competition framework. So it needs to be depend on the facts, like especially in substantial investment and also competitive value and the agreed terms of use. Okay, so more importantly, the data IP registration certificate was recognized as a prima facie evidence of the holder's property type interests and lawful data provenance. So in AI, what you protect is combined set for us to think about, like technical information, data set, data assets, methods or process, business intelligence, and sometimes you need to prove that you have input substantial investment with a real high competitive value economically. Okay, so don't wait for a dispute to reverse your engineer secret point. Build the ledger early, because your ability to organize code, weights, data sets, prompts, and roadmaps into a controlled inventory largely determines whether you can later explain and define and also win your competitive advantage with your real protection. Okay, so there are a simple or practical governance methodology that I can understand clearly and also simply. So this is a practical core. We compress all actions into 4 minimum levels that we can all understand, like for example, ring fence, the 4-piece ownership puzzle, the evidence pack, and the minimum breaking system for external facing functions. We will deep dive later. So if you can run this 4, even if without perfection, risk moves from out of control to manageable. Okay, so we go with first ring fence. So we answer what can enter the AI system. The easiest, the most robust approach is a 3-layer ring fence. Layer 1, no go. Okay, it cannot enter, no matter how urgent, and raw customers' data like non-identified contracts and diligence materials, poor source code, key process parameters, undisclosed patent plans, all cannot go. Okay, it's no go. So layer 2 is allowed with processing. For example, summaries, de-identified samples, replaced variables, bounded parameter ranges. So it's not a blanket ban, it's controlled use. Okay, so layer 3 is allowed with logging. Okay, there are several allowed scenarios, but you must record 2 versions. Okay, and also to record key prompts, human modifications, and approvals, especially into the evidence pack. Okay, so naturally, no-go is not to try to spare employees. It is to make it explicit what must never be pasted. Okay, allowed with processing means you permit use after summarization and de-identification. So allowed with logging means you permit use but insist on traceability. Chinese regulatory texts offer governance levers, algorithm recommendation, deep synthesis, and generative AI rules place responsibility on the provider's ability to manage. So you need to explain how you control, how you warn and handle, retain and respond. So the content labeling rules and related national standards further push product level traceability. So don't wait for dispute and add logs. So second, the 4-piece ownership puzzle. So in outsourcing and code development, so many contracts still say all IP belongs to us. So that is often not enough in AI era. It's not because it's not strong. Actually, sometimes it is strong generally, but because it is not specific, so we need to add more. Okay. So when disputes come, the other side will ask, so is this improvement yours or generated within our data and processes? So if you lack a structured answer, you lose control. So let's split first, then allocate. So split first. the 4 pieces we compress as the first is background IP, so which is what you already own. Okay. Second is data, which is who provides training or fine-tuning or evaluation data, whether it may be used for training, how long it is retained. And third is outputs, which are deliverables, generated content, code, designs, who can use and supplies license, and improvements, the most drift prone. Okay, so like way to updates, prompt library deposits, workflow optimizations, evaluation set iteration. So once those are clear, negotiation becomes controllable. Also, don't ignore like exit mechanism. So not the other party shall delay, but how to prove deletion, to what extent, and what may continue to be used, what must stop, and how waits or logs are handled. So many partnerships break at the end, not at start. Okay. So third is evidence pack. So evidence pack is if you are operating dossier. A minimum viable evidence pack is about clarity. It's not about fancy or it's a normal routine. So like project timeline, project ID tools, some tools that are used or versions and input boundaries, key prompts, parameter ranges, iteration records of who chose what and who approved external release, and how anomalies were handled. So many companies lose not on the doctrine, but on the that they cannot explain what they did. So we set an engineering target here, be able to export a minimum evidence pack within 20 hours. So we don't only aim for the court, okay? So we prepare for the court. We also prepare for the boards, okay? For the customers, for the partners, and also regulators, and the future disputes to see what you have controlled clearly and transparently, okay? So a minimum closed loop usually includes project ID and timeline, input boundary, prompts, key parameters, version iteration logs, and most importantly, human decision records. Why this output? What was modified? Who approved release? So you don't need to publicly display every detail, but internally, you must be able to produce that, okay? There is a public judicial signal. In an AI text-to-image case, the Beijing Internet Court focused on the plaintiff's intellectual input in model settings, like prompt selection and result selection, and discussed the public right-to-know considerations, okay? Noting that clear labels like AI illustration can be proper practice. So in short, it's not about whether courts like AI, but whether you can prove humans made choices and whether your process is logged. Okay, so if your goal is trade secret protection, the evidence chain goes further. So you must prove you took secrecy measures. Of course, the Supreme Court of China judicial interpretation on trade secret civil cases details several elements, including confidentiality obligations, infringement assessment, employee scenarios, and interim measures. So you cannot just say we value secrecy. You need policies, you need permissions, logs, trainings, and incident records. So this can be incorporated into your evidence pack. Okay, so to the fourth, with a minimum braking system for external facing functions. Okay, once you provide external AI generation, recommendation, or automated decision capability, you should not rely just on disclaimers. So you should be able to explain how the system is governed. China's rules emphasize on governance capability, what you warn, what you block, what you retain, how you respond. Like the Personal Information Protection Law, PIPL, provides individuals the right to know. The algorithm recommendation rules refer to explanation duties, And also for the EU AI Act imposes transparency obligations for GPAI providers, including training data summaries. So transparency does not equal full disclosure of algorithm details. It is closer to disclosing reasons. So explain the operation and decision logic and basis. Reason disclosure and trade secret protection are not inherently contradictory, but they can be balanced. In the first Chinese case describing about the algorithm elements as trade secret, which happened in Guangdong in 2022, a court view was set it as even if some algorithms are publicly known, different algorithms can solve the same problem. Okay, so a company's selection of specific algorithms, paths, coefficient settings, and ranking logic may be protected as secrets if they're not publicly known or commercially available. Okay, so the practical meaning is we see that as the reason layer can be disclosed while the parameter matrix stays locked. So I break the minimum breaking system into 3 items: variable logs, so you can explain the system during complaints, and also regulatory inquiries or disputes. A complaint and handling SLA, how fast that you respond, who decides the takedown, and how you review, and how you prevent repetition, okay? And an escalation mechanism, which are sensitive content, repeat infringements, high-risk prompts must trigger human review, okay? So you will find this aligns with EU transparency and documentation. So different emphasis, like it's the same operational governance. So we need to move and we need to think about the transparency versus trade secrets. We always talking about that in EU, right? So there's a standard that or there's a common standard or principle in USA. We can take it as an anchor, okay? NIST, which is reported as a 4 principle of explainable AI, offers a practical frame like explanation, meaningfulness, explanation accuracy, and knowledge limits. We set it as a model here, so but we move and anchor this in China's own legal requirements. We want to have a 4 principle in China, but China doesn't currently have a neat 4 principle document. But if you pull the binding rules together, one practical standard emerges, like notice, choice, explanation, verifiability, and each has a clear legal source, okay? For the notice, which is disclose what the system is for and how it broadly works. It comes from algorithm recommendation rules and generative AI measures. Second, which is a choice. So provide real output and non-personalized options. So it comes from algorithm recommendation and PIPL, okay, personal information protection law. And explanation, which is when automated decisions materially affect individuals. You must be able to explain, coming from PIPL. Verifiability, labels, metadata, like plus log retention, plus complaint handling, plus supervision support. It comes from 3 regulations, which is listed here. So as professionals always talk and differentiate, China is more like operational governance model, right? Labels, logs, complaint handling, and you need to support your governance. And the EU is compliance deliverables plus structured summaries with transparency. Okay, so the US is engineering frameworks. It's a NIST style explainability language. So if you operate across all 3 jurisdictions or continents, so don't reuse one template because they're different. Okay, better to design 3 balancing setups so you can stay transparent without giving away your balance, right? So one more trap that kills trade secret strategy quietly is copyleft contacting. So if you build on strong copyleft licenses without thinking through commercial plans, like key improvements can be forced into disclosure, shrinking your trade secret space. So in short, the four levers are not nice to have. They are minimum configurations, so don't wait for a perfect system. Run your no-go and run a four-piece ownership table, drill your evidence pack on projects, and put in a minimum break system. So that can help organization with better protection and management. Okay. So this section is for framework only. This is a very complicated and complex matter. Currently, there are no standard answers. The scenario that most often tracks projects to a halt and causes boardroom conflict is like this. It's EU, China, or cross-border co-development. Then landing in another jurisdiction, like in Europe. So for example, a European company co-develops an AI solution with a partner in China or partners in China, then plans to deploy it back to Europe. Okay, so the EU side asks about documentation, training data summaries, and China side insists core algorithms, data, and security boundaries cannot be exported. So neither side is being difficult, or neither sides are wrong. So the two systems simply emphasize different priorities. One leans towards transparency, the other towards security and controllability. So in summary, or on another word, why do EU-China projects argue? So because the center of concern differs, right? So EU teams, let me say it again, EU teams often focus on transparency, explainability. China teams focus on security, controllability, governance, leakage prevention, vendor constraints, non-spillover, etc. So NDA alone is usually not enough. So it says don't leak, but it doesn't tell you how to not leak in a structured way. Okay, so I offer three core keywords to start for reference. Right? First is layered disclosure, zone deployment, and segmented ownership. So think of them as three gates, right? First, you should be able to explain the system externally without exposing your bottom cards. Second, collaboration should be possible internally while access remains segmented. Okay. The third, commercial cooperation should move forward without improvements drifting into a model of unclear ownership. Okay, I won't give one-size-fits-all answers on disclosure granularity. What must remain in China, or how long logs must be retained, because that depends heavily on your database, supply chain management, and project structure. But conceptually, you must separate the written and governance layer from the non-exportable layer, such as model paths, weights, engineering details, and knowledge-based structure. So what I give you here is facts to confirm this. What exactly is being co-developed? Okay, is that data or weights or application layer functions? Where does training or fine-tuning happen? Using what data and under what authorization chain? Okay, and who can access prompt libraries, evaluation sets, and repositories? Okay, and what must be disclosed to regulators or customers, and what must remain protected as trade secrets or security boundaries? So here, the hardest part is not to write a longer NDA. It is turning explainability needs and trade secret boundaries into one workable architecture. And once the project enters co-development, EU landing or multiple jurisdiction delivery, legal should not derive alone. Better to bring in R&D, architecture, IT architecture and security, procurement, business owners in parallel, and lock down what is being co-developed, and where training happens, and who can access what, and what happens at the exit. Okay. So this is a module that we discuss about if something really goes wrong, how do we enforce, and also how do we respond? So when an AI trade secret dispute hits, the winning move is rarely to sue first. Start with urgency. If the service is already running online, contain it first. Okay. Administrative takedown, technical disruption, and channel blocking. If the product is still in rollout, block scale early through your app stores, cloud marketplaces, and deployment partners. So if the technology has already spread, treat the first phase as investigation. Lock down the facts, the timeline, and scale. So administrative action matters because AI evidence is often electronic and internal. Okay, logs, backend records, emails, financial data, etc. But administrative action is only powerful if your own dossier is ready. Okay, you must still define the secret points, show the measures that you run, and preserve evidence as if civil litigation will follow. Okay, civil litigation is where you go for the full remedy and damages, judicial confirmation, and closure, and for your full cover for the losses of profits that your company are deserved, right? Criminal linkage is the escalation route for serious cases, especially where evidence destruction risk is high. But across all three tracks, one reality stays the same. Like fraud enforcement is hard for now. Okay, so deletion, verification, API rerouting, version control, and multi-tenant deployment all make enforcement harder than people expected. Okay, so the real playbook is not for your foreign choice. It is chain of containment, evidence fixation, investigation, civil remedy, enforceability, plus your criminal threat, probably. So, and that is why the best time to win is before the incident. Decide now who can suspend services, who preserves logs, and how your break system is triggered. So in AI disputes, if you improvise under fire, you usually lose control before you can reach to the court. So this in the last like 1 or 2 minutes, let me close with a 30-day plan, and the full handouts will be after session handout will be available after this session through us or the help desk. So you can send us email or get in touch with the help desk and FinnCham China directly, which can be shared. So week one, let me be short. Do not start with policy. Start with diagnosis. So you bring your business, engineering, legal, procurement, IT, security into one meeting. So classify AI use cases into internal use, okay, external facing functions, and co-develop or outsourcing. So then build a top 20 asset ledger covering inputs, process assets, and outputs. So here's your goal. Like, you know what you are protecting, who owns what, and where the boundary is weak. Okay, so in week 2, set input boundaries and two boundaries. Okay, so legal and compliance can write a clear no-go list in business language and our methodology. IT and security can define approved tools and approved use cases. Okay, business owners also can like make sure the training actually happens. At minimum, you need a no-go list, a white list, and a short training record as a start. Okay, the week 3 is test the evidence pack on 2 projects for a pilot case. Okay, so one internal, one external facing or outsourced. Require the team to export within 24 hours with the exact strict timeline with 2 version, input boundary, key prompts, and etc. So if you cannot do that, you do not yet have a real control system. So week 4 is patch contracts and vendor governance. So identify all AI-related vendors and ask 3 questions. Will they use your data for training? What do they retain and for how long? And who owns output and improvement? Then patch this priority clauses first. Okay, so 30 days don't make you perfect, but it can close the most dangerous bleeding holes. So you start with that and you develop and create more, like building your architecture, building your building, okay? The recommendation is like you run fast. So you don't wait until a system are integrated. So most companies lack not strategy, but the first round of executable sections. And this slide is here for a special note for handling vendors or suppliers for a company. So most AI disputes do not begin with bad faith. They begin because no one asked the right supply question early enough. So before debating drafting language, I always suggest starting with 3 simple questions. Like first is training use, second is about retention and deletion, third is about ownership of outputs and improvements. So all of them starting from you have a governance-led structure for your company with a AI-specific trade secret architecture for your company to protect yourself. So the key takeaways are here. Like first is asset control. It's not about the abstract compliance. It's a company level, organizational level strategy design. And second is about you need to identify or recognize what is your silent bleeding, which are the real risks, okay? And then the 4-layer asset taxonomy, which is our methodology to identify what assets to be protected and how to make it real, okay? And then we have methodology for 4 minimum levels. So this is only a first step for the company to reform and to rebuild your governance or compliance or protection architecture, okay? Then we are ready for the 30 days, and it is enough to stop the bleeding, to help you from losing control to manageable. But the company needs to build your own system through this 30-day plan, okay? Last but not least, we are still developing and studying the complexity between EU-China co-development structure. So it requires more structural solutions for companies beyond the NDAs. So at last, I need to give all the thanks to FinnCham China EU Commission and the China IP SME Helpdesk, and also all the credits to our audience who are really being interested in how to make sure the governance in AI, the new era. So I need to stop here.